everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and our guest tonight is Dirk Rowley. Dirk, thanks for joining me tonight.
Absolutely.
You are fresh off a newscast. How did everything go in the wonderful world of news?
There was no adrenaline. There was nothing breaking. So that, in my mind, is always a win.
You almost sound disappointed when you say there was no adrenaline.
There are days where you're like, oh, well, that was... what was that? That was routine.
Yeah.
Very, very rarely does it ever happen that it's routine.
So do you still experience the stress that comes with doing a newscast? Are you gotten used to it, and does that bring its own kind of stress? How does that manifest itself in you?
Yeah, the stress is still like as I say something, and when I hear it finally out loud leave my mouth, and I'm like, oh, that's not 100% right.
Yeah.
And then the question is, how many more mistakes will I make on the air because I'm still dwelling on what I just said, especially if the script is right, but I throw in a sort of or a partial, I somehow modify what it was supposed to say.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, no, that's not right at all. And then that just kind of lingers until the commercial break usually.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, that's maybe one of the biggest things, that it was just, how you just want to just shut up and read what's there, because the sweat went into getting everything down on the teleprompter correctly.
Yeah.
At that point, just stop ad-libbing and read it.
Yeah. I've found, and I may be cursing myself by saying this, but the few times I've been on camera, I almost do better live because I know there's no second chance.
No parachute.
Yeah. So that almost works better for me. But again, I may prove myself wrong the next time I do something live.
I'm 100% convinced that's true.
Yeah.
I think live is better. There's a certain energy. There's a certain honesty that you get when you know that you can go, all right, stop, hang on, wait, no, do over.
Yeah.
I think that first of all, you're constantly editing or evaluating everything you say. Yeah. And then secondly, I think there is just a certain energy that you get with just being live and knowing you get one try and give it a go.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here, and thanks for...
I was going to say thanks for making special accommodations, staying late here so the old TV diva can show up after hours at Asher. I appreciate that.
We certainly wanted you to keep most of your energy for your day job and have a little bit left for us, so thanks for joining us. But as you know, on this podcast, we talk about career path, we talk about your organization, and most people are very familiar with Wayne 15, but we'll talk a little bit about the inside view of that, and then we'll talk about some of the things you're working on, and you work on something every day with a really tight deadline. So that'll be interesting for folks to hear. But let's start with career path, because you have, like many of the guests on the podcast, a really interesting one. And take us from the beginning, whatever that is to you, to how you got to the anchor seat at a local news station.
So in Marion, Indiana, I was asked to be part of a speech club contest, or a speech contest for the Rotary Club in Marion.
All right.
Went to Eastbrook High School. It's Upland, Indiana. I'd done it my junior year. I got 3rd out of 5. I went back my senior year at the insistence of my drama teacher and got 3rd out of 5. So I am the most average public speaker you will ever find. Literally couldn't be more average. But the senior year, early in the year, the general manager of the radio station came up to me, and I remember distinctly he did not have a business card, so he wrote his name on like the napkin and his phone number, said, I didn't really care for your speech, but I like your voice. Yeah. Would you be interested in coming over and working part-time? And I'm like, that's better than a paper route. Yes, I will do this.
Okay.
Thought I was going to be a lawyer at that time. And then I think basically anybody who thinks they're going to be a lawyer and then gets bad grades becomes a broadcaster. So fell in love with it, was working full-time my senior year in high school.
So this is senior year of high school.
Senior year of high school.
On the radio. Wow.
Working full-time at a 50,000-watt beautiful music station.
Okay.
WMRI, Relaxing 106.9.
What is beautiful music?
Beautiful music is elevator music.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So let's take a really good song and ruin it. Right? Let's take all the words out and then, make it all violins.
So there were really stations for that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And that was, so none of my friends listened. Maybe their parents listened.
Yeah.
Probably their grandparents at that point. But yeah, at that point, it was still a successful format.
Wow.
And that's how I started. And when I still go into a restaurant or am in a literal elevator and hear that music, it kind of sets me on edge because I had to stay awake and pay attention to so many things that music just kind of makes me edgy. So then I finished at Taylor University, went there since it was, A, it was close, and B, it was a really great school that was right in my backyard.
Sure.
Got through that, then came to Fort Wayne in 1989 and worked at 1380 AM back when it was playing country music.
Okay.
Forerunner to K105.
Okay.
And was actually doing quite well. And that was my first real chance encounter with ratings. And through just statistical flukes, was just blessed to went from like wherever we were before I got there, 9th to like 2nd at night. I was working 7 to midnight on a station that didn't even cover all of Allen County at night. Wow. And
so
just
why the
blessed.
bump in ratings? Was the
I'd like to say it was me.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, that was the only thing that changed.
Yeah.
And I was told by Bill Collins, the guy that hired me, he said, I got 2 rules. Don't swear. And then across the quarter hours, so, like at 15 after and 30 and 45, don't say anything. Just go from song to song. And that was his brilliant programming. And I'm like, okay. And then, otherwise, he's like, just do whatever you want. Have fun. So I kind of just, at that point, nobody I thought was really listening, and just kind of goofed around and had a ball.
Okay. So backing up for just a second, when you were at Taylor, communication major, journalism major?
Yes. Yes to both.
Okay.
It was mass comm at the time.
Got it.
So with the journalism, I guess, I took all the journalism classes Taylor had to offer, which wasn't many, maybe 2 or 3.
Sure.
Then mass comm was newspaper, radio, television. Thought television was completely unrelated to anything I would ever do.
Sure.
And then was focusing on radio. And then the newspaper, again, was completely irrelevant because I had no desire, although I was working on the campus paper.
Sure.
But then all of a sudden the internet came along, and all these things you learn about, how to lay out and all these layout and design, all that stuff, suddenly made sense again.
Sure.
So, so really fortunate to have gone through Taylor. I think the general manager at the station I was at in Marion at the time suggested, because I took a gap year. I was having so much fun on the radio. I thought, I don't want to go to college. Nah.
Sure.
And he said, no, you probably want to learn something to talk about.
Yeah.
All right. So liberal arts school.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Okay. So beautiful music station, country music station. Then why do you make a change, and where do you go from there?
Went across the street in a rare move where people don't usually cross the street.
Yeah.
Went from 1380 AM to 93.3 FM.
Yep.
And was, again, just rode the wave. I'd like to say somehow I was this brilliant morning show host, which I was not, but Garth Brooks was really hot at the time. So guess what radio station showed up at number 1? And you're just like, again, like to think it was me.
Yeah.
It wasn't, but it was, again, just it's some fun success. That led to a chance to work with a guy that when I was in the building at 1380, it was Federated Media, still is Federated Media. At the time, I was being considered to be Charlie and Tony, those 2 guys, legendary, market dominating morning show here. Tony was coming off to become general manager, and I was scheduled to become his fill-in. So I would have been partnered with Charlie Butcher.
Yeah.
The last minute, they decided we were too kind of alike. We both kind of were driving a morning show.
Okay.
So they decided that was not the best pairing. But the guy they brought in and I became really close friends. He hired me then to leave Fort Wayne to go to Las Vegas.
Okay.
One of those where you're like, okay, sometimes it's better to not get what you wanted, because at the time I was just devastated. I was like, man, Charlie and Tony, how cool would that be?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I went to Las Vegas, was there for about a year and a half, met my then girlfriend, now wife.
Okay.
Just as I was leaving. She's from Fort Wayne.
Okay.
And so we were dating long distance the whole time and wanted to get back here. Wasn't anything available in Fort Wayne. Went to a South Bend radio station owned by Federated Media. Just went monster gangbusters, and then finally came back here in 2000 to Magic 95. So I worked blocks from where you are now.
So all radio.
All radio.
And are you thinking that's where you're going to stay?
Sure.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, yes, there was a point, you could see as digital caught on and radio got a smaller and smaller piece of the advertising pie, and all of a sudden, budgets were cut and morning shows became kind of a thing of the past, the big multi-member morning show. It got less fun, but I never thought I was going to do anything else.
Yeah.
And so came back to Fort Wayne in 2000 and was downtown at Magic for almost 15 years.
Okay.
And then kind of with enough people switching, that company, Sarkis Tarzine, is so good. They never want to like blow anybody out.
Yeah.
But they clearly wanted to change.
Yeah.
And they were ready to kind of re-scrub the magic call letters and try to call it something else and try to go younger. And I'm like, you know what? Maybe it's time for me to leave.
Yeah.
Looked around, and that's how I got into television.
Okay. So what was that change like? I have to imagine, there's probably more safety in radio because it's just your voice.
Yes.
You're a known quantity, but you're not getting stopped at the grocery store by every other person. What's that transition feel like from the inside?
Thankfully, it was, kind of in steps.
Yeah.
Occasionally you get stopped like at a drive-through. People would recognize my voice more than in a grocery store because if they could see my face, they were like, well, you might sound like that guy, but there's no way that guy looks like you do.
Sure.
And so, okay, I don't know what that means exactly, but, that
they have a vision in their head.
Right, exactly. So, it was just like, and then all of a sudden it was like on Insight was it was a lifestyle sales kind of pay-to-play talk show. On at 12:30 on the ABC affiliate here, and all of a sudden, it wasn't a lot of people, but yes, I was occasionally would get stopped, and it would be like, "Oh, Insight guy." You had no idea who I was, but they knew I was on the show, and it was like, "Oh, wow, people do watch," because again, 12:30 not the biggest audience using television, but they were watching, and it was a lot of fun, and what that job more than anything taught me. Technically, I was in the sales department because it was, again, a pay-to-play show. So I'm trying to get people to come on the show. Taught me a lot about businesses, and how to, all these different industries, how to evaluate, how to talk their language, how to talk sales. Met a ton of people that I'd never probably would have met otherwise. Like every mayor outside of Fort Wayne, in the 11 county area, felt like was on our show at one point.
And you had no prior experience to the sales side?
Oh, no, not in sales. No. I mean, my dad was a salesperson, and the only thing he ever told me was, all you're doing is collecting no's. That's the one thing you can control. If you can go out and get 100 no's today,
you're probably
odds
doing
are
your
you'll
job.
get some yeses. Right, exactly. But it was like, that's all you can control, and I tried to take that mindset in. But it was, again, Insight is a great show. It's a tough sell for everybody.
Sure.
Because again, not everybody has got a big ticket item that all it takes is one viewer to make up for it. I mean, if you've got to sell 500 things, well, that's going to be tough.
Sure.
So, but just a ton of, marketing experience, and then learning the TV. Eventually, at the end of that time on Insight, I became the producer of the show, and so literally was doing the editing and the graphics and things like that.
Wow. So what was the biggest learning curve making the change from radio to Insight?
Which camera is on.
Really?
I mean, honestly, that was just, it was so, because again, like we're talking now, you have a microphone, I have a microphone. This won't change the entire hour. But then all of a sudden in TV, it was like, oh no, we wanted you over right there on that camera.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, oh, well, that would have been good to know before I stared off, way left. And it was just learning that. But honestly, so much of Insight was, predetermined questions. My favorite thing is when a guest would go, that's a really good question. And I'm like, well, yeah, you wrote it. Of course you think it's a good question. You actually handed me what I was supposed to ask you.
So did you have any, knowing that guests are not professionals, did you have anyone who just froze up once the camera went on? And how do you deal with that?
There's some that you would try. I mean, again, there was a case where it wasn't always live.
Yeah, sure.
There was certain ones that I missed. There was one guest in particular who was kind of touting something that gave you a mental edge.
Yeah.
And literally the words came out of her mouth after this segment that was 4 minutes of just, you kind of were like, she was reeling you in, and you were like, okay, this is interesting. And then all of a sudden, I asked her, I don't know, for a website or phone number or something, and she just blanked.
Wow.
And everything she had just said felt like she had just undercut in that moment where she goes, oh, I'm sorry, like I had a brain fart. And I'm just like, wow, that's exactly you're the only guest who the audience can't really forgive that. I mean, and that's like,
wow.
But for the most part, I felt like the guy catching the trapeze artist. Like, my job is to not let you fall. My job is to not let you, crash and burn. I want to do everything I can to make you look as good as I can.
Yeah.
Because, we want to just tell your story.
Sure.
And so that was the opportunity, and that was the challenge.
Yeah.
And for the most part, I think it worked fairly well. Some people worked better than others, but usually there was very few guests where I couldn't be interested for 4 minutes.
Yeah. So you do Insight for about 3 years,
Yep.
Is that correct? And how do you end up in the anchor seat at Wing 15?
So when Quincy Broadcasting bought Granite, bought 21,
Yeah.
Quincy's theory was that I was in sales. They were not really, they had a very bright red line between news and insight, between news and programming.
Yep.
And so I was in the sales department, and none of their salespeople were under non-compete contracts.
Okay.
First time in my life since I was 20 that I didn't have a contract. And I was at first really offended by that.
Sure.
And then all of a sudden, the kind of chain of anchors shifting at Wayne happened, where Heather went to Sweetwater, and that let Brett Thomas, he kind of looked around and was like, well, maybe it's time for me to do something else. So they had the Tara fill in from the morning to nights, but they didn't have a morning show. Pat didn't want it. Yeah. Pat wanted to stay on the morning show. And so all of a sudden that job became available, and I just really applied through the front door. Yeah. I didn't try to go through any other. I knew the news director, through some conversations, but not well. Yeah. Tried to not, go inside. If they want to talk to me, they'll talk to me, and they did. So at the time, they'd always said, we focus on people that know the market, are local, and I thought, well, this is either a slogan or they mean it. Yeah. And they meant it.
Oh, wow. So what's that experience been like? Now you've been doing that for about 3 years,
correct? A
correct?
little over 3 years.
So how has that gone for you? What have been some of the challenges? What have been some of the things that maybe have gone better than you expected?
So honestly, there's times I joke, I got hired because of my Rolodex. I got hired because I know the market and I know, the Northeast Indiana region. And if I don't know I know who knows. Yeah. Like if I don't know, if somebody, I can't get a hold of in one phone call, I can get a hold of them in two. Yeah. And that's been good. That's been true. And so I felt like, okay, at least I've honored my part of the bargain, So that I think has gone well. There's still times where I have trouble in an interview thinking of, well, what are we going to show on the screen? I'm like riveted to what the person is saying. Yeah. And I'm like, well, great. We're done. Yeah. And then I get back to the station to edit it, and I'm like, where's
the B-roll?
Right. Yeah. I have nothing. This is a terrible story for TV. And sometimes you can make it work on the internet, wakeandonwayne.com, but there's like, wow, that was really rough. And so that's the part I still... Certain camera guys know that I'm going to forget to ask for the shots that I know that they know I need. And so some of them will just be like, oh, well, you didn't ask. And some of them are like, you're going to want this. Yeah. And I'm like, thank you. You're right. 100% right.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Wayne 15 from the inside, because obviously people know what they see, but what's the organization like? How do you fit in, and who are the other people on the team who help you do your job?
So we have, that's a great question. I think everybody helps me do my job, honestly. Sure. I mean, it's the biggest difference between radio and TV. Radio, literally, it was me sometimes by myself or me and a morning show partner, and that was it. And you could do everything versus TV, where you not only need all the people that you see on the air, you need the people in the newsroom you don't see. Then you need the people that handle like the mics and the cameras and the lights. You need them, and then you obviously need sales to make it all go. So there is a much bigger team in television. Yeah. So my day starts at 2:30, and when I get in, there's a producer that's been there probably since 10 that is working on the 5 o'clock or the 6 o'clock shows, and they will have most everything written. They have most of the, am I reading it or is Alyssa reading it, so that I know I can go through and edit to the way I want to say it, or if I'm, think the original draft was not clear, I can make it clear. I can add perspective, so that's kind of my job as an editor. Yep. And then we do the news at 5 and 6. Usually there's an hour for lunch, and then come back and do the 11 o'clock show. Mm-hmm.
So the copy that you're reading, is that copy you've written almost all the time, or is it rare that it's copy you've written?
I probably, that's a great question. I don't know. I originate a story on my own maybe 3 times a week, where it's my story from start to finish.
And I would assume that's easier because you have
think, and there are times literally where I try to get to the camera, to read it in the teleprompter, because it's very different when it's on a page that's the width of a computer screen, and you see 50 words left to right, and then all of a sudden I see 3 left to right in the teleprompter. It just reads differently, so I try to always pre-read it, and inevitably, when it's my script, I'm like, who wrote this garbage? Because I've got the typos, it's harder to edit yourself. When it's somebody else wrote it, I can hack away. But I write it and I'm like, oh, that's a really good phrase. I got to have that in there. And then I try to read it on the air and I'm like, that's garbage. It's just, simplify it. Just make it easy. And
you almost know too much.
So there is that. And there is that danger. That's a huge one, is that you forget, what it's like to not know. And so you just kind of smuggle some secret knowledge in there, and it's like, make a lot of assumptions, and then it becomes less clear.
Sure. So what are some of the stories that you've been involved in that had the biggest impact on you? Maybe, ones that had some tragedy to them, maybe ones that were more positive. What are some of the things that you've covered that have sort of stuck with you over the years?
Positively, Fort Wayne was Tara Brantley's idea, and it came from that you never cover good news, and her own personality. She likes to emphasize the positive, and I could see that. She was a market legend in TV news for 30 years. So, but there came a point after she did it weekly for a year and a half that she just said, could I tap out, and can you take some of these and I'll take some of these? And so the advantage, or the opportunity to look around and find stories that were just 100% blatantly positive was fun, was refreshing. And now you're going to ask me for specifics, and I haven't come up with one in my head yet.
That's okay.
But there's a whole list of them on Wayne.com that I was just like, these stories wouldn't have gotten told otherwise. Never would have made it to the news station had Tara not thought that idea up.
And in terms of, the other side, stuff that it has an impact in a different way, anything come to mind that, sticks with you?
Yeah, so right before I started at Wayne 15 was when they had that story of, now I'm going to space her name because I wasn't on the air. The little girl, the 30-year-old mystery death. What is her name?
If it helps, I don't recall either.
You would though if you've lived in Fort Wayne long enough. They caught the guy that killed her through DNA testing. And this is going to drive me nuts now. This is the joy of getting old. So anyway, but then the fact that story just rippled as for weeks after they caught the man. You're talking to her family, who has now gone 30 years without seeing a girl that was in elementary school at the time, would have been an adult. And it's just the heartbreak that you get. Before I started this job, I had no idea that there were so many car crashes or so many murders or so many, because again, you kind of hear it, 1 day, 2 days a week, but you don't hear it every single day. And just to hear just the heartbreak of so many families can become a lot.
Oh, sure. And that's, it's a challenging question, but it's one of the reasons I asked the question, because I don't think people can easily get desensitized to that.
Right. And there is a point where as some of the reporters who have left were just like, I just couldn't handle that anymore.
For sure.
I think now, sadly, some of the biggest challenge for people in the industry is there's so many people that are mad at us. You know?
Well, and that was my next question, is sort of the state of the media. This is a marketing podcast,
right?
And there's obviously the church and state relationship between journalism and marketing, which I have a lot of respect for. And this, ongoing national conversation about the role of the media. What do you think people are getting wrong about it? And is there anything valid in some of the criticisms that are, being directed at the media? And how do we resolve that? How do we move forward?
Have you read Trust Me, I'm Lying?
No.
I just finished this, and this is a guy who was a marketer, and he practiced the dark arts, basically, of manipulating blogs so it would bubble up and that would, some local TV station or some, network would bite on this story.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you could go back and reference the fact that, well, now the Wall Street Journal has reported this, so it must be true.
Sure.
And that's scary, is that it feels like in this rush to be first, the attention economy, the click and I get paid economy, it's almost back to yellow journalism, where the screaming headline gets the most attention, gets the most page views, and even if it's wrong, great, because tomorrow the correction will get just as many. And it doesn't matter ultimately, what we think or what people, how they're informed, and it's almost like junk food news. And it was really kind of eye-opening to read that, where it's like, I would contend that Wayne 15 and Wayne.com and any of the local TV stations here and the Journal-Gazette don't operate on that. Like, yes, we're proud of Wayne.com. It's not our biggest money maker compared to the broadcast. So we really do have a reputation that we want to try to maintain for accuracy, that there is a trust there when you tune in that you are going to get the facts as unbiased, or at least both, all the sides as we can. So there is that obligation, but I don't think everyone realizes, when you get all your news through Twitter or Facebook or people that are sharing things, that there is no incentive for a lot of these places to be right. It's just how attention grabbing is it?
Sure. Well, and the other challenges, as you know probably even better than I do, is that you then get fed more of the same from the algorithm, whether or not it's valid or not. And it feeds the beast. And, the way I've explained it to people is, it used to be that if you had someone with a very fringe idea in a community, they were the only person in the community with that idea. Now they can find 10,000 like-minded people, still a fringe idea, still not true, but now they have strength in numbers. And that's what's driving a lot of the confusion and the stuff that, is provocative and getting attention, but maybe not worthy of that attention in today's environment.
And then other blogs, if they see that taking off, can report what they said. And so, the chance to echo and amplify is a big problem. And I don't know what's going to happen, but I would say that there is nobody I'm aware of with a legit media presence in Fort Wayne. There are some of those guys, I think, that are trying to do just that, the local bloggers that are going after the sensational, just the clicks.
Sure.
I think there's nobody here that would ever want to be wrong at the expense in order to get page views.
So is the antidote just continuing to uphold those standards and hope that people see the value in that?
That's 100% the hope. I mean, that's, if you're not subscribing to the paper, and this is from a guy who, in theory, the papers are our competitor, right?
Sure.
But they aren't. In my mind, they fill a completely different role. The fact that they have one deadline a day, that it's, they get more time to kind of, ingest the story and maybe get reaction to it and go deeper. We need to keep the paper alive. And at this point, subscriptions are paying for more than advertising. And so that's kind of important.
Sure. So in terms of that line between advertising and journalism, the reality is the advertising is what keeps the media in business, but obviously you don't want to be overtly influenced by those dollars. How is that, from your perspective? What are some of the challenges in striking that balance, and how do you do it successfully?
Yeah, some of the challenges, I mean, thankfully I have yet, and hopefully never will have, a conversation where it's like, why did you cover that story? That they're a huge advertiser, we haven't had that meeting of,
we have to dial it back.
Right, because, exactly. I mean, now I would be lying to you if in the back of my mind, when Parkview is in the news, when they are in, whatever, there's been stories where especially Parkview gets covered from the New York Times for having whatever it is, where I'm like, okay, we need to make sure we get this story 100% right.
Positive and negative. Because if it's positive, does it look like it's pure promotion? If it's negative, are you eroding the relationship?
And I can live with the positive. Because again, look, there's a lot of good companies that are doing great things,
Sure.
or sometimes they're not even doing great things. They're just doing
their job,
things.
yeah.
But it makes news.
Yeah.
If I drive down the street and they're turning dirt somewhere, I want to know what's that going to be.
But a lot of it depends on what else happened on that given day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, sometimes, those stories get pushed aside.
Sure.
But I'm not too worried about, I personally would rather talk about a grand opening of whatever restaurant in Waynedale than something that came from Indianapolis or Evansville
Sure.
or Chicago.
Sure.
So, if you're a marketer listening to this, you would be maybe surprised, especially if you're in Allen County, how willing we would be to hear that press release, to get a copy of it.
Yeah. Yeah. So in terms of, the where media is headed from here, not asking you to have, a complete crystal ball on it, but what do you see changing in the near future? What do you think will remain the same? And how does that look down the line?
So
I'm not asking you easy questions.
no,
tonight.
so
I don't know why we're going
local
down
television I've heard described is the slowest of the melting glaciers.
Yeah.
There used to just be newspaper, TV,
Yep.
radio, that was it. And now that digital's crashed the party, they've taken so much of the advertising dollars and revenue away from these traditional media places. I think thankfully Wayne.com is prepared to get us into the future. I think it's just a much more robust site than some of the other folks are offering. I wouldn't be surprised if in the future that's maybe where all the news goes.
Yep.
But then, as I told you, I think if it becomes click driven as opposed to truth or viewer driven. That's dangerous. I've heard people floating ideas that there could become like a national model. I don't want to say PBS, but maybe almost where there are just grants either from the government or from benevolent, foundations that just keep journalism alive and fund 3 or 4 reporters at least, or maybe even more, in various, newsrooms in various cities.
As an arbiter of truth.
Correct. As it's just so much, it's so important to our citizenship and our civic infrastructure to have a place that is giving us the facts, that is attending these meetings on my behalf because I'm too busy to go, to all the meetings that will impact me.
Yep.
Sometimes I don't even know about all the meetings that could impact me. And so you need someone that's there and giving a truthful account of what is happening at those meetings.
Yep.
I get very nervous that could someday leave the ecosystem.
Sure.
And I don't know what happens at that point. But it's not. I don't think blogs are going to cover the bases.
Yeah. No, I think you're right, and I don't have a lot of good answers on it. I just hope we either remain or go back to a place where we have trust in something that is, our true north in terms of sorting out fact from fiction.
And that's the most frustrating part, I think, of the 3 years that I've been here, is there's certain groups, especially where there's two sides. Downtown protesters versus the police would be the example.
Yep.
Where the downtown protesters will look at us, and I think now they've looked at all media this way, and say, you only talk to the cops.
Yeah.
Well, guess what? The cops have 5 different public information officers that take our calls 24 hours.
Yeah.
They're occasionally giving us stories.
Yeah.
So yes, we talk to the police all the time, but that doesn't mean that we can't also talk to you and accurately convey your viewpoint.
Sure.
And it's hard because, again, I think people with a cause don't trust a media that's not 100% on board with that cause.
Yeah, sure.
And
it's never been the role of journalism to be on a side.
Correct.
It is just to reflect the voice of both sides and let the viewer or the reader sort it out for themselves.
Right. And that's the hard part, is again, you'll get criticism that we lean too far right in our coverage. We lean too far left. Every time we air a national news story, the politics of that, ratchets up. People don't necessarily care left, right in Allen County or in Fort Wayne, but boy, you get up into Washington, D.C., they care. And that's why I want to do as much local news as I possibly can. That's why I'd rather talk about your restaurant opening, quite frankly, than maybe what's going on in Congress, because there's a million other places you can get that.
Exactly. I think that's really, in my mind, that's always been the future, and the reason why you need local news is you're not going to get it from anywhere else. You're not going to get that information, and you can't possibly, even in a connected world, and sometimes because we're in a connected world, you can't get to the stuff that you don't know about, but you need to know about.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, there's only so much social media can tell you. The Nextdoor app is great, but I'm not really sure that's going to, let me know really everything that's going on in the neighborhood.
Sure. Well, let's switch gears a little bit to the speed round of the show. We're asking you a few questions that are synthesized versions of some of the things we've talked about. And I may throw you a couple curveballs. But the first one is about career path. You've done a lot of different things within the realm of media. When you think about some of the best advice you've learned about building a successful career, what comes to mind? What would you want to share with people?
I'm a big fan of the Global Leadership Summit that happens every year, especially in Fort Wayne. It happens obviously global, but Fort Wayne is one of the biggest, groups that attends. That when a leader gets better, everybody wins. Yeah. So much of my, I guess, enjoyment in going to work is, am I working for a boss that at least isn't screwing things up?
Yeah.
If you're neutral, even that's, and sometimes I don't think we appreciate that when we're leaving to go on to the next job is, who am I working for? What is that culture like? Talk to me, talk to other people that have worked for that person.
Yeah.
So I think a leader is critical, and just even if they're good, maybe you don't fit their style.
Sure.
And it's just learning, who you can work with, what they expect from you, do they have clear-cut goals and answers and things like that? Never take that for granted if you have a good boss.
Yeah, I think that's really great advice and underappreciated advice. I've heard that said as people don't quit jobs, they quit bosses or they quit people. So I think that's one people need to hear more clearly, is that it's really important to pick a good match in your boss and even in your coworkers in terms of people who are going to allow you to do your best work. Yeah. All right, second question. This is where I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball. What are some of the misconceptions that exist about either Wayne 15 or about the media at large that, if you had the opportunity to clear them up, what might you say is a misconception or a myth, and what's the truth?
There's two, I think, specifically for Wayne.com or for Wayne 15, is that, you didn't cover this. Why didn't you cover this?
Yeah.
You literally need to let us know about something that is going to happen for us to cover it.
Can't cover it after it's over.
Right, exactly. Or, you can if somebody's really smart. So again, if you're a marketer and you grab a ton of B-roll with your phone and include that, it can happen. But yes, if you can just tell us ahead of time that it's going on, we are much more likely to cover it than if we go, oh, that happened?
Yeah.
Didn't know. It seems obvious when you say it, and yet there are tons of times that we find things that we're like, all right, write that down, because when they do the second annual one, we're going.
Yeah.
And we would have loved to have been at the first one.
Yeah.
But just nobody thought to tell us until afterwards somebody went, why weren't you there?
Yeah.
The second one, though, is Wayne.com. I don't know what you picture the staff looking like. A lot of people, I think, picture it working like a newspaper where there's headline writers and there's editors and there's just not. It is such a bare bones operation that still manages to, the content is just rich and deep and is just, covers Fort Wayne unlike anything else. Odds are, if you have a question about what's happening in Fort Wayne, you'll find the answer somewhere on Wayne.com. And it really is remarkable, the people that we have that are exclusively digital. 1, 2, 3, 4. Maybe 4.
Wow.
And then the rest of us, obviously, that are on TV also contribute, and some of the producers also contribute. But it's a remarkable undertaking for as few people are assigned really to care for it.
Wow. So if there's a typo, maybe cut them some slack.
A little bit. Yeah, there's a couple guys online that are like self-appointed media critics.
The grammar police.
And I'm like, thank you, because you are our unpaid proofreaders. This is fantastic. We're gonna check in with you every day and go, let's go correct that, and there we go. Thank you, fix.
Yeah.
And they're doing that for free.
So last question, we've all been through a lot in the last 18 or so months. What's something that you learned during the pandemic, maybe that you didn't know before, that's going to stick with you moving forward?
Yeah, I always feel like when I hear you ask this question to other people on the podcast, I'm like, this is tough for me because I literally did not work from home one day. Every day I went into the station.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Yeah.
Now, there were reporters that didn't, but I, as an anchor, went every day. I guess I'm most surprised by the audience tolerating Zoom interviews because there's a certain point where you're like, look at that, the production is terrible.
Yeah.
I mean, people's offices are terrible. Half the time they get the laptop on their knees and the camera is shaking the whole time.
Yeah.
But nobody seems to care. Or if they don't care, they're also used to it because that's the world we all kind of lived in for a year. That it's like, all right, well, whatever. That's, And again, in the past, if we were talking to somebody from outside the market or somebody we couldn't get a camera to, we would have just put a still photo up and talked to them over the phone.
Yeah.
So arguably, Zoom is better than that.
Yeah.
But that, I guess, really kind of surprised me that, it's not very crisp audio or video. I mean, sometimes it doesn't, their mouth and the audio aren't framed, aren't syncing. But people seem to be okay with that. And because of that, that allows us to do so many more things more nimbly and with a far greater reach. Somebody from Fort Wayne is caught up in a hurricane or wherever.
Yeah.
Well, does your phone work? Because we can Zoom with you right now and you can show us where you are.
Yeah, I had that experience, was interviewed when I was in Texas with my son. And the only challenge for me was I have to find something with a collar. And I think I threw on like an Asher pullover that had a collar. I was like, all right, this is better than my T-shirt, but it worked great.
Yeah.
It wasn't the same as being, on camera, but it worked.
Yeah, and that the ability then to find how much people care or don't care.
Yeah.
At least they want to read coronavirus stories. There was a point we took it off our front page. Yeah. That was about a month when there were 10 cases or whatever a month or a day in Allen County, and then all of a sudden it started to climb again, and suddenly it's back there because people. I mean, again, I'm tired of talking about it. If I never said COVID-19 again in my life, I'd be thrilled. But people still seem to care, and the information is changing. So we have an obligation to tell you what the experts are saying. Yeah. Whether you believe them or not is up to you. Yeah. But there's no way we're not reporting what the latest news from them is.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And thank you very much for your candor. This was fascinating, and hearing, from the inside about what's happening in the media, how things are changing, and some of the things that maybe we hope will stay the same. It's great to hear about all that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the invitation. And again, if you're a marketer listening to this, feel free to reach out. Again, I am always interested in people doing cool things in and around the area, and would love to hear more.
So, Dirk, what's the best way for someone to get a story in front of you or the Wayne 15 team?
Email works really well. News release at wane.com hits everybody in the news department. I will warn you, we get probably more than 400 emails a day. Yeah. Sometimes coming directly to just me, Dirk, Dirk Rowley, Rowley, at Wayne.com works better. And I've literally had 2 or 3 times in the last 3 years, somebody say, this story is too complicated for a phone call. Do you want to meet for coffee? Mm-hmm. And we'll explain the premise. And I'm like, okay, now I get it. It takes me 30 minutes to wrap my arms around it. And then it's like, yes, that's a story I think we would now like to cover. Yep. That works. And you don't even have to buy. I'll buy my own coffee.
Yeah, so old-fashioned face-to-face communication sometimes works.
Imagine that. Yeah. Imagine that. Yeah.
Well, thanks again. I appreciate it. Thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode. We'll be back next week with another great guest, and we hope you will join us then.